Hey everybody, Chris with Overclockersclub here. I just finished these two coolers and now we're ready for the Masterliquid ML360 Illusion. On the surface, comparing the two coolers, the ML360 mirror is the one I just finished reviewing. But this one has the 3 RGB fans, whereas the mirror did not. It only had RGB effects really on the top of the pump. And even though these are supposed to be the same pumps here between the two, it looks like they've reworked the RGB effects on that pump. Now it has the same motherboard compatibility with the RGB synchronization. And this one does have a little different controller there, so I'll have to see what is involved with that. Well, I did confirm that the pump here on the 360 Illusion is the same pump that's used on the 360 mirror and the 280 mirror. Same pump. The RGB effects seem to be really the only difference, the way that's mounted to the pump, and we'll see that here in just a moment. So actually, let's see. I don't know if I talked about this already, the addressable RGB Gen 2. So there's a special controller in here. Looks like it's compatible with the Master Plus software, so that's something I'll have to look into in some more detail. Of course, there's the usual goodie bag, and I'll go through that here in a little bit. So I'm curious to see what the pump here looks like. And okay, so it does seem to have a little different top there, so you can't really tell what's going on until we get it powered up. The leads coming off of the pump, we have a 3-pin power connector there, power plug. And then this one here goes back to the RGB controls, which should be this controller right here. Now this is different than the mirror series. They do not come with this little controller. Okay, so yeah, we've got let's see. So there's a power, there's a USB connector, and it looks like we've got 3 sockets there for RGB coming off of the fans. So that's what this does here. And again, I'll have to figure out exactly how this works after I get it powered up. So the fans here probably then have 2 leads. There's going to be so we have a regular 4-pin PWM connector for power to the fan, and then there's this short little stub which is an RGB connector. And let's see, the RGB effects on this fan really look interesting because looks like there's an inset around the perimeter of the fan. So again, after I get it powered up, we'll have to look into that. Now the controller though is a little, okay, so this is a 3-pin connector, but that's a 2. So there must be in this bag some special cabling. Okay, yeah, so here's your RGB connector. This is your gigabyte connector here. So a lot of times this connector will come directly off of the pump, but here this is a special cable. Just for that. So here's your SATA power. Okay, there's the 2-pin connector that goes to right here. So that's how you get power to the unit. So that plugs in, and then this goes over to your power supply. So you get power off of one of your SATA leads. Let's see what else. Here's another cable here. So this is your USB connector. So this goes to your motherboard, to a USB header. This end will go over here. Let's see, to your controller. So this will plug in here. So this is how you interface with your controller to your motherboard. And there's yet another This is probably this is a fan splitter so that I can plug this 4-pin connector into the motherboard, and it splits it into 3 separate connectors there for your fans. So you can run all 3 fans off of one single connector. Alright, so I looked at it in a little more detail here, and it's kind of like I thought. The way these RGB systems work is you have 2 options. One is if your motherboard, and this motherboard over here, my test system, does support the RGB synchronization, then you can plug your header directly into your motherboard and use your motherboard to synchronize what's going on with the RGB. If you have an older motherboard that doesn't support that, doesn't have the special dedicated RGB header, then this controller is what you would use to control the RGB effects. And of course, you can do that still sort of through the motherboard by using this USB connector. So you have 2 different ways to basically get to the same end result, which is controlling the RGB. And all of that is really covered here in the manual. It goes over the different ways, the cables and the connector, or the connectors and the controller, how they're all configured there. And it takes a moment. If you study it, it's not too hard to figure out. The other thing about a manual, while I've got it, is, let me go back to the other side here. What I like about it is it has this little bill of material here, so you can sort of go through and make sure you have the required quantities of each one of these items. Sometimes there'll be like an extra screw or an extra fastener in the bag because they know sometimes you lose one, but it's good to do a quick inventory before you get tearing into it. But this goes through all your different socket configurations for AMD and Intel. So let me get the actual radiator out of there next. So this is the ML360 mirror that I've already reviewed, and this is the 360 Illusion. The radiators are identical, they're the same. The cooling lines are the same, and the pumps are the same. Now I was thinking there was a dimensional difference that you could see between the 2 pumps here with the different RGB effects. Of course, this is the mirror, obviously. And then this one here, the Illusion, has the different setup there for the RGB. But whatever the dimensional difference is, I can't really tell. I've already got the mounting brackets on this one, so before I can install the Illusion, I need to get the mounting brackets on there. These are both radiators that have 12 tubes between the tanks. The tanks are the same physical size. And as I get the plastic bag off here, the thickness between these 2, that is also identical, but I'll verify that. So the way I did that on this radiator here, and I'll do the same thing. So my calipers here can't squeeze past the thickness of the frame because the radiator here is a little thinner than the frame, and I can't measure that directly. So I take these little pieces of aluminum and I just zero my calipers out on those. So those are coming out about 16.98, 16.99. Zero that, and then when I come over here and just put one on either side of the radiator so they sort of stick out past the frame, and when I measure that, I should get the same measurement or very close to the mirror, and I'm getting about a little over 20 millimeters, 20.18. So these are the same thickness. Not that that's really a concern, but just so you know. And the other thing here is when we flip this one around so you can see the other side of the radiator. And be real careful when you handle these. The fins here are very delicate, and it doesn't take anything at all to bend those. On this end of the radiator you can see that there is the warranty sticker, and the warranty sticker is hiding the fill port here. So if you peel that sticker off, and don't peel the sticker off because you will void your warranty, but that's where the fill port is when they put the coolant in the system from the factory. So really between these 2, the difference is the pumps are the same, the radiators are the same, the fans are a little different, so we're moving a different volume of air. between the two systems. And of course the RGB effects are a little different. We have the RGB fans here, whereas the fans on the mirror are not RGB. So those are the main difference. So performance-wise, these are probably going to be very close, so it'll be interesting. So the next thing is to get this installed onto my test system. And one other thing to talk about here real quick, and before I do the install, I'll go through the hardware bag here. But the other thing I forgot to point out on the pumps, the difference between the cabling here. So this one here is the ML360 mirror, the one I already looked at. So it's got the 3-pin power connector, which you have the same over here on the Illusion. You get the 3-pin power connector. So both of them obviously have to get power to the pump. But the difference is on the Illusion, it has this extra cable that I already looked at here. Since the RGB effects are different and I'm controlling fans, the leads coming out of the pump are different compared to the mirror here, because the mirror has the two different connectors, one that goes to a Gigabyte motherboard, the other goes to your other motherboards for your RGB synchronization. So that's really the difference between these two systems. All right, so now I'll get to the hardware bag. All right, and looking at the hardware kit, which is pretty much the same as with the other coolers here in the Masterliquid series. So these are the brackets that go on the pump base. This is the base bracket that goes behind the motherboard, and notice the shape here. It's sort of like a T, an upside down T. That's for a reason. That's to fit the back of your motherboard. So you need to make sure you get this oriented right. It only goes on one way. Screws to hold the brackets here to the pump. These are your standoffs. Little tube of thermal paste. This is for your socket LGA 2011 fan screws. And then these are your AMD mounts. So everything you need for your installation, whether it's AMD or Intel, is here. Now this won't fit in your Threadripper series from AMD. That's a different cooler altogether. All right, so now I need to get the motherboard prepped, and then I can get the pump installed and we can start doing some thermal testing. All right, so I'll get the graphics card out of the way so we can see the motherboard a little better. And let me zoom in a little bit to where we're going to be working. And I'll get that thermal paste cleaned off of there here in a little bit, but I'll get the main bracket here installed. And remember, that T-shape that you can see is there for a reason. It is there because if you look at your socket, you can see there's one screw at the bottom and two at the top. So on the back side of the motherboard, that bracket has to allow for that shape. And if you look at it, that's why that cutout is that way. Now I'm laying it on top. Of course, this goes on from the back, but that sort of shows you why it's important. So it goes on like that and not like that. So I'll get this installed from the bottom here. And normally you would pull these strips off of here. This is the backing for the adhesive strip. But since I'll be pulling this cooler right back off and not leaving it on there, I'm not going to pull that adhesive or expose that adhesive right now. All right, so you can see the little studs there, or the hollow threaded studs, sort of poke up through, and then you get one of these started at each corner, and they're the same either way. It doesn't matter whether it's flipped this way or that way. But you get them started, and then you snug them down a little bit. And one thing you may notice is that this whole bracket does still move around a little bit, even when these standoffs are tightened down. And that's normal. There's nothing wrong. When you get the CPU cooler, the base of the pump mounted on top there, that'll take all of this play out. Now this isn't too bad, but there is a little bit of motion there, but don't be surprised. So you have to prepare the pump, and that's really easy. You take these two brackets and install them. I've already got them on there. But if you notice right there, there's a little tab and a little notch. So that's sort of to key the bracket here to the base of the pump. And then you also notice these feet are bent down. So those bend down in the direction of your motherboard. So if this sits on top of your motherboard, you can see those feet are bent down. So anyway, you install those brackets. There's only one way they can go on there. One on either side, and then you want to leave this sticker on there, this protective sticker. Copper base is soft. You don't want to scratch it or put any dings in it. So leave that sticker on to the last minute. But also don't forget to take it off when you are ready for the installation. So next you get these are the little fasteners that actually attach the pump to the base. And what you want to do is sort of alternate. I like to go sort of corner to corner. I don't tighten any of them all the way down until I get them all sort of started. And think of it like the lug nuts on your car. You don't tighten one down, you sort of go in a cross pattern, you go opposites, so that you load the pump, or load the force of the pump down on top of your CPU evenly. So I'll sort of do every other one like that. I just realized, I forgot to show the thermal paste application, but that's not very exciting. Anyway, all right, so these are all snug down. Now I've got to get the fans installed to the radiator. But before I do that, I want to talk a little bit more about the fans. And these are some very nice fans. I really like the design. In fact, on the back here, it's sort of neat. There's the date of manufacture, so February 2nd of 2021. Shows that it's DC 12 volt, and I like the way they put the RPM range right there on the fan, so you don't have to guess when you pick a fan up. You don't have to get online and try to look the specs up. It's right there, 650 to 1800 RPMs. And this is a 9-bladed fan. You can see again, here's the lead coming off its 4-pin PWM, and then the very small short lead here is for your RGB. And it looks like, of course, the fan itself should have the RGB effects show through the blades since they're sort of translucent. But we also have this ring around the perimeter on the front of the fan. And then you have it's interrupted there at the 4 points, but it should be an interesting effect when we get the power to it. And for anyone interested in how long your fan lead is here, my scale here goes to about 305 millimeters, and it takes up every bit of that. So we're talking about 305 millimeters of lead. And I know sometimes people like to use these little electric screwdrivers when they install things. I would advise not using one because they have an enormous amount of torque. And when you drive a fastener against a plastic frame, you can actually crush it or crack one of these ears. And you can also easily strip threads out of things. So I would just go with a good old-fashioned screwdriver or your fingers to get things at least hand tightened, and then come back with a screwdriver. But anyway, the other thing I forgot to point out here, I like these rubber pads. So each corner on both faces have these little rubber isolation pads or sound and vibration dampening pads, whatever you want to call them. They just help keep any fan noise down, keep it from radiating through your case or through the frame or your chassis or whatever you want to call it. So I'll get all of these installed, and then we can power the system up. And the first thing I do after I get the power to it, of course, I look at the thermals and make sure nothing's running away on me. Make sure I got the pump mounted properly, got the thermal paste all in the right amount in the right locations on top of the CPU. But the first thing I'll do to the fans is I'll run the fan tuning software, and what that'll do is it will look at the amount of voltage and current to run the fans at the minimum and the maximum RPM. You're sort of like calibrating the controls. And get this up here for the top fan. That's important. Otherwise, especially when you have all your other case fans in your system, you want to know that when you tell a fan to go to the maximum RPM, it's actually running at that RPM. So most motherboards now have software that does that calibration. Oh, that was pinched in there. And it just makes things a lot easier. All right, a couple more and we'll be good to go. All right, so I have all three fans connected to the three-way splitter here, and then that goes over to my CPU fan header on the motherboard. And then I actually have on this particular motherboard, let's see, one of these, it is the top one there, is the header. Specifically, it's called out for an all-in-one pump. So that is where that one gets plugged in. All right, so now we should be ready to power it up. All right, so everything is powered up, and there's the fan tuning. I got that started. So it runs the fans at their maximum and minimum RPMs, and it creates a fan curve or a fan profile for any fans that are plugged in to the motherboard. So that takes a couple minutes. And you'll also notice that none of the RGB stuff is working because I haven't plugged any of it in yet. So I need to get that configured also. The fan tuning is done. You'll notice I added this little fan, but that's to cool off this 10G network card that I'll be doing some other testing on. So right now he's just going along for the ride, and I'll show that off in a separate review. But for anyone who's never seen how these liquid cooling systems work, this radiator here is actually split in half. There's a baffle right about here. Sometimes it's 50-50, sometimes it's a 60-40 split. Either way, so the tank is really split into two at the top. So the coolant travels down roughly 1/2. It goes all the way down, it gets to the bottom down here, makes a U-turn and comes all the way back up. Of course, it should be cooler because it hasn't just traveled 360, it's traveled 360 and then over and back. So 360 millimeters twice to get your coolant temperature lowered. So now I'll get the overclock running, the system specs. I'll post those here in a minute, but I've got a 9900K CPU. We'll crank that up to 4.9 gigahertz, and we'll use AIDA64 for the stress testing. All right, the stress test is rolling. I let everything get up to temperature for a while to make sure I get a good thermal soak on all of the coolant and the components. We're running about 68 degrees Fahrenheit in the room, which is around 20 degrees Celsius. And this has really been performing the same as the ML360 mirror, between 66 and 68 degrees. And I would have actually expected this to maybe run a little higher since the fans don't move as much air, at least on paper they don't. But you know, it seems to be running good. The pump's running about 2300 RPMs and the fans are running at their maximum 1800 RPMs. They're also just as quiet as the fans on the ML360 mirror. So I would say the ML360 Illusion is very similar in terms of performance. So really the separating factor or the deciding factor would be the RGB effects you get there with the fans and a little different effect there with the pump. And of course I'll cover the RGB stuff in more details here in just a little bit. And before I get to the RGB effects in more detail, I'll break out the good old thermal camera and we'll look at this thing through the infrared imagery. And here we have the thermal camera. You can see on the right hand side of the radiator, as we talked about earlier, there's the baffle in the top of the tank that sends the coolant down one side where it makes a U-turn at the bottom. Got some cables in the way there. And then the coolant comes back up the other side, and it should be a little cooler than when it went in. So we're right around 28, almost 29, and it should be a little warmer on the other side, yeah. So we're knocking a couple degrees off. At least this is the external surface temperature. Now the actual temperature of the coolant would be a little different. We look at the other side here, you can see the hot spots in the center of each fan. That's where the fan motors are. So you can see they are a little warmer. And the colors here don't really tell you what the absolute temperature is. They're just showing you that there is a differential. So when you go back and look at the motherboard, the hot spot here will be where the VRM is when it's under stress. That's where most of the heat will be generated. You can see it's pretty warm right down in that area. So anyway, that's what the thermal imaging looks like. Okay, moving into the RGB control, and I'll talk about several ways to do that, but the main way is to use the Master Plus software. And to use that, you have to use the included controller, which I call it the big box, but it is really called the Gen 2 RGB controller, and that's included with this cooler from Cooler Master. So you go to the Cooler Master website, you download the Master Plus. This particular rev is 1.6.2, but that will change over time. The next time you log in and check it out or do an update, it may be 1.7 point whatever. But anyway, right now the current rev is 1.6.2. So you get the software downloaded, you get it installed, and then after it goes through the installation sequence, you see all the stuff going on there. Then you can fire up the software and start playing around with the control of all the RGB. And this will also work with other RGB devices, certain RGB devices from Cooler Master, and you can look at the compatibility and see what all it can control. Okay, there are 3 ways to control the RGB system here for this cooler. The first way, if you have an older motherboard that does not have the ability to sync any of the RGB features, you use this little box here, and it's just simply a little clicker, and you cycle through the colors, and I'll show that here in a minute. The second way is using this hub. So the hub connects via this USB connector to your motherboard, and that is how you control it through the Cooler Master software here. And then the third way is to disconnect this USB plug, and you would plug, let's see, okay, so this connector right here would plug directly into the synchronization socket on the motherboard. That way the motherboard controls the colors. So you can control them, again, the first way is with this little box. The second way, you let this bigger box control the colors through the software, or you simply hook the system directly to the motherboard and let whatever software you're using on your motherboard control the colors. And another thing to note, if this is the only Cooler Master device that you have for your system, and there are a whole list of devices that this particular software here, your Master Plus software, will control. But if this is the only one you've got, then this has to be plugged in, because if it's not plugged in when you fire up the software over there, it does not see any device that it can control connected, so the software won't even fire up. You just get a little error message. So keep that in mind. Now, from the perspective of having the most control is this box right here. If you use this box, connect it to your motherboard, and use the Master Plus software to control it, then you have the most control over the colors, over your addressable RGB. And this here is an additional channel. So you actually have 3 channels total. So the first channel, when you use this box, is for the pump RGB system. The second channel, right now I have this fan plugged in just to simply show that I can control more than one thing. This is the Master Fan SF120M, and there's actually a third channel here, so if I had a third fan, I could plug it in there and control it also. Now, as far as the software goes, if I want to control it, you have all these tabs at the top. You can go in and customize so many aspects. You can set up your individual profiles here, and some other modes here. Here's the control hub. Now I don't have the keyboard or any other products connected, so right now I just have the pump, the Illusion 360 right now. So I can come over here to the controller, click on that, and when I come down here, you can see I can control the different features. So as I click on the different features or functions, that controls the system here, and then I can go in if I want, and I can change the colors to whatever I want also, all through the software. So if I want purple, I can get purple. If I want red, if I want green, some shade of kind of a yellow, it's hard to tell. That's more of a yellow. A lot of times the colors don't come through on the camera quite so vividly as they do in person. So the next thing, after you hit the apply, then it sort of locks that up. If you come up here to the setup, and you click that, so you can see right now it's showing the 3 channels. So the first channel is populated by the Illusion 360, so you got 3 fans plus the pump RGB. Second channel right now I'm using, the third channel is empty, but if you come down here you have to define what you're using. So I already selected the master fan, and then the pull down here you can see all the different fans you can select. So I have the right fan selected. If you don't have the right item selected, you run into problems. It doesn't know exactly how to address the individual LEDs, so things look kind of weird. So you need to make sure you select the right item. So that's just a real quick overview of the software. It's fun to get in there and play around with the RGB, especially if you have other items, other RGB items on your system. Okay, so next I'll show you how the little manual box works, and then I'll plug it into the motherboard and show you how the motherboard can control the RGB also. So now the box here, this little clicker is in control, so you can see as I click it, and I do not have this fan daisy chained in there. Right now it's just standing alone by itself. So right now I only control the color of the fans and the pump, and you have to make sure that you unplug this little USB connector from the motherboard. So right now this would be like if this was an older motherboard that didn't have any RGB control, you can sort of basically cheat and use a little switch here. So it's a little less forgiving. There it is, completely off. You do have that ability. There's the rainbow. You don't have quite as much control like you do with the hub here or with the motherboard. So that's about all you can do with that. Now we'll look at the motherboard control. So I'll hook it up here to this connector right there on the motherboard. And now I'll get this plugged in. The way the pin configuration is, you really can't mess it up. It only goes in one way. And after that's plugged in, sometimes you have to reboot your system for it to recognize that you have this plugged in before it will control it. And after a quick reboot, the motherboard is now controlling the colors. This particular motherboard, the Asus motherboard, uses Armory Crate as the software that does the synchronization and the RGB control. So right now it's static. It's set to blue. So I click that. Now I can come around here and just pick a color. So red, orange, yellow. Get up there where we can see everything. There's sort of a light blue, there's cyan, here's a dark blue, pink, and we can just shut it down altogether if you want. So that's static mode. We have breathing, so it will cycle through colors. If I select the random, it will just go through colors. I can change the speed, and different software packages allow you to do different things depending upon your motherboard. Here's the good old standard rainbow, so it will cycle through the rainbow colors. And let's see, you can get it to synchronize with the beat of the music. The smart one will change color with the temperature of your CPU. So right now everything is nice and cool, so it's green, but as you can see, you can sort of, it's basically a way to alarm you. So if you've got your fans out where you can see them, or your motherboard, and you glance over and things are yellow, you know they're getting warmer, and if they're red, well, things are up here in the danger zone. And you can select by CPU usage or temperature, all that good stuff. So anyway, this is just sort of showing you that you can synchronize this with your motherboard. And one last thing to keep in mind is that sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes you can run into some conflicts with the software that controls the RGB, because you have different software packages from different manufacturers, and usually it plays nicely with all the other software packages, but sometimes you get one that just doesn't want to work well. So you've got the Armory Crate here from Asus, controls the motherboard synchronization with all the other components. You've got the software from Cooler Master that controls the RGB system. You've got the software maybe even from Mushkin to control the RGB on the RAM. There's software from Corsair to control the RGB on those modules. And you just have to experiment if you have some issues and see which package works best. You might have to uninstall the ones that don't work as well. And sometimes it's just a matter of the order that you install them. That can have an effect on what files get overwritten, and whoever the last one to be installed is the one who takes control. Anyway, just something to keep in mind. Okay, so overall I'm really impressed with the Masterliquid ML360 Illusion. I like the MF120 halo fans. I like the RGB effects. I like the Master Plus software here that you can use to control it. And again, this is version 1.6.2. This will likely change, but it will still probably be Master Plus, whatever the rev is. Anyway, I like the control that you have over the RGB fans if you really want to get in there and customize them. So you can check this out in more detail at the Cooler Master website. This sort of talks about the new Gen 2 RGB controller right here. So remember, you do have 3 ways to control it. You've got this controller, you've got this little manual, I call it the clicker. It's more for motherboards that don't have any RGB control capabilities. And then of course you can synchronize this by directly connecting it to a motherboard that has the synchronization capabilities. Right now, pricing at Amazon, the ML360 Illusion is $159.99 at Amazon. I think that's a decent price for what you get. That's right in line with a 360 millimeter RGB system. The other things, again, I already talked about the MF120 Halo fans. Let's see, the Gen 2 ARGB controller. I like that. And then the 3rd generation dual chamber pump. It is very quiet, I can say that, and it does seem to do a good job. Again, it keeps the temperatures right in alignment with my other 360 millimeter radiators. So, with all that in mind, I would give this the Overclockers Club Gold Award. This is Chris with Overclockers Club. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.